Carrie's going to hit that record button. Okay, so go ahead and click your buttons. Okay, I'm going to start over because we just hit record. I'm Lisa McCarthy, and I'm the Dean of Education at Maple Village Waldorf School. Very happy to host this parent education session today. Carrie Ronnie, go ahead and wave your hand. Carrie is our host behind the magic curtain today, letting everyone in and working all the buttons, is our communications and outreach coordinator. And just a reminder to stay muted unless you have a question at the end. And I will let you know that we're only going to be recording up until right before questions and answers. So we're not going to be recording the Q&A section. We realize some people might have some private questions that we don't want to have on the recording, and we respect that, that it just stays in the room. And that's just also a reminder of confidentiality for everyone joining today, that we're going to sit together as a group in an imaginative circle, as you will, and that anything that anyone shares with their questions about their own children or families would need to stay in this room with each other and not go outside of that. So exciting. I would like to introduce our, I don't want to call you a speaker because you're way more than that today, our coach today, Marlene Martin, who is a developmental and educational consultant and a parent coach for sure. And Marlene and I have been working together for many years, and working together in our different realms, and all in support of students and their families. And I've really appreciated this relationship with Marlene because she's so wise and so wonderful at seeing the needs of children and families and able to help. And on that note, we met I asked her if she would be open to leading a workshop with you. She said, absolutely, let's plan it, just like Marlene does, and doing it of her free will as a volunteer. So that's really special to us as well. And when we sat down to talk, to find out what is helpful right now, we came up with this topic of parent and child dynamics, like what is your child showing you at home, tying into sensory needs and all of that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Marlene, to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and launch into this topic. Oh, and I will say one more housekeeping. Sorry. If you would like to, if it's going along and you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, but we're not going to answer it till the Q&A section.
Yeah. So make sure you put a detail in there about what you're asking about, like as far as parent-child dynamics, or when you mention, step number 2 in parent-child dynamics, stuff like that, just to give me a hint about what you're talking about. Sometimes we'll go back and read questions and it'll be like, what did I say? How did I say it? But anyway, hey, I'm Marlene.
I do see, sorry, Marlene, there's a question, can the kids listen? And I would think this is really for adults, but yeah. So if you have headphones or earbuds, that would be a great idea.
It's just nice. I think it's nice. I don't think I say anything that would be upsetting, but it might just not make sense to them. You know what I mean? Depending. So, well, hi, Lisa, thank you so much. I also really value our relationship. I've had a great time working with you. It's been so much fun. So I jump at a chance to work with you and with your wonderful school. And I can see that there are some of you who already know who I am. So I'm going to say hi. You may not be showing your faces, but I know your names. So hi out there, good friends and lovely people. A little tiny bit about myself, because my story is long. My children are all adults now, and the story started before even they were born. We'll start at the time at which I was a Montessori teacher. I have been a Montessori teacher in the past. I'm going to go ahead and confess that I enjoy Waldorf more than Montessori. I really do. Even though a little bit of my heart stays with Montessori, I really love the Waldorf model. And I've spent 2 decades working with children, probably a little longer, because I've worked with children since I was in my teens, but I've spent about 2 decades working with children, about 17 years working with children and their families. And I have a son. on the autism spectrum. And while I've always loved kids and loved working with them, it was really raising him, that just opened up my world and allowed me to see so much more than I was seeing. I mean, granted, I was 23 when I had him, so I was still pretty young, but just opened up my eyes and my world and allowed me to see so much more about what it really means to raise a child, like just the amazing opportunity we have to shift the life of a child. I have 3 children who came from my belly, and I have 3 more stepchildren. So I've helped raise at least 6 children in my household underneath the roof of my home. And so all those experiences developed into a career working with children and families, because I wanted what I learned, I wanted to share with others. And I've always kept learning. So I have umpty certifications and trainings underneath my belt. You can always ask me that stuff on the side. And soon there'll be a website. You guys can just look it up and see all the stuff that I've done. So you'll get to know me a little more once I have my website up. We're working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. We titled this little workshop, "What is my child's behavior telling me?" Because behavior really is communication. It really is. That's all behavior is. It's communication. And so every time a child, and everything we do is communication too. So, our behaviors are all communication. So that's where the parent-child dynamic makes such a big difference. It's what molds our children, right? It's a big part of what supports them and what guides them and what they learn from, because everything we do is a behavior and communicates something, and everything that they do is a behavior and communicates something. So just starting at that basis, that all behavior is communication. All behavior is communication. So try to wrap your mind around that. I know the first time I heard that, I was like, what? What do you mean all behavior is communication? Everything we do with our bodies is communicating something that we feel, something that we think, something that we sense. Sometimes it's a response to something someone else is doing. And those, we're going back and forth. That children and moms and dads and caretakers and teachers, we're constantly in this dynamic, in this rhythm, in this dance. So before I even start to talk about that dance, the parent-child dynamic dance, I want to tell you something. And I know that this isn't a great dichotomy, and that maybe we shouldn't always put things in dichotomies, but I'm going to do it just to simplify. You know how we always say the good news and the bad news? Well, I'm going to start with the bad news, because I think it's always great to just get that over with and then go towards the good news. The bad news is that there is no one magic formula to parenting. There is no one way to do this. Parenting, here it is. Parenting is trial and error. There will be error because it's how we learn. Moving through an experience is how we learn, and we can't get something right until we understand it, and we can't understand it until we move through it. So we can prepare, we can read books, we can talk to parenting experts, but your experiences are your greatest teachers. Every child is truly unique. Like, I really mean it. I have 3 children that came out of my belly, the same exact mixture of biology between me and my first husband, the exact same thing. None of them, to me, they don't even look like they're related. I know that they do look related because I know them better than anybody else knows them. I see their differences. I see their personalities. I see the way that they move with their bodies, the way they communicate with their bodies. There are similarities, but they're so unique. And I didn't parent any of them the same. And you can just imagine what happens when you mix into the mix children, stepchildren, and half brothers and sisters. It makes a wonderful mix, but it takes a lot of, that's a topic for a different workshop. We'll leave that there. Blended families are beautiful, but they're also a lot of extra work because there's even more diversity. So just remembering that each child is unique, and even every parent-child relationship is unique. So the way I parented my oldest is most definitely not the way I parented my youngest or my middle son. And my two children, my two first children, my oldest and my middle son, they're only 15 months apart, but they're incredibly different, you know? And so I had to be a different parent. I had to have a different relationship with them. So just remember that every parent-child relationship is unique, and you are not the same parent to any of these children that you have. Remember this, it will save you much needed suffering. There's no way to get this exactly right, because there's no way to get it exactly right. There's no one formula. However, the good news is you can successfully support your child into adulthood. You can. I've done it. I've seen other people do it. It's amazing. It's the most amazing experience I've ever had, is to be the parent of adult children, because I finally get to see the results of everything I did, every mistake I made, and everything I got right, and everything in between. What they did when they took our, like everything they learned, all of our dynamics, all of our interactions, all of my responses, all of their responses to me, and they grew up and they went off. At least 2 out of 3 of them are out of the house. So 3 out of 5 of them are out of the house, because I had 2 stepchildren that lived with us. So we were down to the 2 babies, 20 and 21. That's what we're down to. It's wonderful. It's the best thing ever. And I just want to say, like, there's nothing more incredible than watching your children grow into adulthood, because we made it. So the good news is you can successfully support your child into adulthood. The road is rocky. See aforementioned point. Refer to aforementioned point. But what you do, how you interact and engage with your child, makes the difference. It makes all the difference. So the fact that you're here is amazing. The fact that you're at Waldorf, at Maple Village, is like, I can just tell you, good job. Already, you're nailing it. No matter how you feel, you're nailing it. You're doing a great job. So let's move on. I told you about the bad news. I told you about the good news. What is a parent-child dynamic? Maybe you already have an idea of what that is. Maybe you already have a sense. Maybe you have no idea. Well, simply put, it's the rhythm and the texture and the flow of your relationship with your child. So the rhythm and the texture and the flow. That's your parent-child dynamic. When we learn more about our children's profiles, when we really start to understand where they're coming from, and that profile is their personality, which is a mixture of many things. It's their biology, the way they show up in the world, the way they process information coming into their bodies, how they process what they hear and they see and they feel in their skin, and even how they process information, like what the education they're receiving, the information, not just information from the elements, but from other people, the way they socialize. All that is a mixture of who they are, right? And so that's their profile, and how we can shift to how, no, let me rephrase that. How we shift, how we respond to them in interaction makes all the difference. So there's how you showed up in the world, right? There's everything about you in your profile, and there's everything about them in their profile. And then the dynamic is how those two things dance together, how they dance together. So first and foremost, before we go anywhere else, this may seem totally disjointed. I was writing these notes out, and I had this at the bottom, and I cut and pasted it to the top, because it is the number one thing I tell every parent I've ever worked with, for as long as I've worked with them, for as long as I've understood biology and neurology, which is a cornerstone of the model that I use. It's a cornerstone. And understanding how your mind works, understanding how your biology, how your body works, affects your thinking and your mind, and understanding how relationship affects all of it. That's the cornerstone of my practice. And so first and foremost, rest. I know it seems impossible, but it's not. And coming from someone who had 5 children in her home for many years, 3 of them teenagers, all at the same time, rest is essential. It's the number one piece of advice that I give. Put your needs first. Oh my God, that sounds so selfish. Oh my God, that sounds so wrong. Oh my God, that feels so wrong. It's not. It's not. Because how well rested you are, how well met your needs are, directly affects your interaction with your children. It directly affects the way you respond to your kiddos. It directly affects the choices you make. It directly affects the way you show up. So more important than anything, I know it's hard. It's still hard for me. It's still hard for me, but it's a practice. That's, I think I say that next. It's a practice. And like anything that we need to practice, it takes time to get used to it. So start practicing now. Take care of yourself. How do you do that? You find what you really need and you do that. And you don't reschedule it and you don't put it on the back burner. You always take care as much as you can. There are going to be things that happen. I know kids get sick. They stay up all night. They have a meltdown. Our needs can't get met. That's okay. That's naturally going to occur in our parenting. But as a direct response to that, you got to get in that self-care. That means sleep. That means eat well. That means drink plenty of water. And that means do the things that you need to do to be really calm and spacious in your body, because your mind needs your body to be functioning optimally. Rest first. So one of the things that I do, just a little one example, I've discovered that I'm really in love with sunrises. And good thing, no one's awake at sunrise. Just me, all by myself. So yes, I get up at 5:30 in the morning and I watch the sunrise. Now it doesn't happen every morning, but it does happen most mornings. I sit, I have my favorite cup of tea. It's a matcha latte that I make myself. I make it just the way I like it. And then I sit and I watch the sunrise. This is how I take care of myself anymore. I meditate while I watch the sunrise. This is what works for me. It doesn't have to work for you. Find what works for you and please do it, because it's essential to your parenting. It's essential to your parenting. Your well-being is number one. Okay, we got past the first and foremost part. Let's talk a little more about parent-child dynamics, which are directly affected by your well-being. Practice noticing. So practice noticing how you respond to your child or children during interaction. Practice noticing. So this takes practice. It takes practice to, in the moment or maybe right after, notice if your body tightened. Notice if your voice changed. Notice if you felt tighter in your body or rigid, or suddenly the situation became really black and white for you and it had to be a certain way. Notice if you feel a little funny fluttering in your belly. Notice if your shoulders tighten. Just practice noticing. That's all you got to do. Practice noticing how you respond to your child during interactions. This is essential to affecting change in the way we want to experience our relationship. So if you're here, most likely you want to hear about different ways that you can affect your relationship with your child and support your child. This is one way to do it. Again, it starts with you. It starts with your well-being, and it starts with noticing how and observing how you are responding biologically to your interactions with your children. We call this self-reflection. Okay, I haven't gotten quite to the self-reflection piece, but it starts with observing the physical responses of your body to specific interactions with your children. Once you've noticed what's happening in your body, you can take a moment when you have the moment. This often with parents happens way after the situation. So we got to kind of remember in the back of our minds, oh, I noticed my shoulders tightening during this interaction. You want to ask yourself when you have a chance, why? Why? Why did I respond this way? Why? There are a couple other questions we can ask, and I know that they're in here. I just got to find them. I may have put them somewhere else. Oh, here it is. Here it is. I'm talking about noticing, right? Practice noticing what you feel in your body. Here's a big part of that. Observe yourself without judgment. Observe yourself without judgment. Usually what happens is we'll notice that we got terse or stern or judgmental or black and white. We notice it. Our voices got higher. We screamed, we yelled, we slammed something. And then immediately we judge. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I know better than that. Oh, we tighten up even more, don't we? So that's judgment. The practice is to notice without judging. The practice is to observe what's happening without judgment. That's sort of like it's step one, but it's the second part of step one. Observe without judgment. It's incredibly tempting to judge our responses. In most cases, it feels automatic. It just happens. It just happens. We have the physical reaction, we have the physical response to our child, and then we judge. Now, noticing that you're getting tighter, more tense, more emotionally up-leveled, more, that's actually not going to be helpful. We want to do our best to drop the judgment. We actually can change that automaticity that seems to come with the judgment. It's a practice. Again, just like it says, it's a practice to notice what the body does. It's also a practice to notice and drop the judgment. We have to consciously drop the judgment. So you'll have it, and then you'll be like, oh, hey, that's judgment. Let me just drop that. That's not helpful. It's not helpful to me right now. Okay? We can change that automaticity by dropping the judgment when it comes up. This is a practice. And like most things we need to practice, we're not good at it right away. That's okay. Drop the judgment about that. With consistency, like most things, like riding a bike or roller skating, we get better at it the more we practice it. When we're able to drop the judgment and reflect on our responses, that's where the self-reflection comes in. We can ask ourselves, here are the questions that I was talking about earlier. Where does this come from? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way? Where does this come from? Those are two questions, simple questions you can ask yourself when you have the space and the time, maybe in the evening, because the next step that I'm going to give you can happen in the evening or happen early in the morning, depending on when you feel the most clear and have the most space. Because really, sometimes you're so exhausted at night, you just pass out. Maybe still wearing makeup, maybe still in your clothes, no judgment. Maybe the dishes are still in the sink, doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't matter. Just go to sleep. Sleep is really important. It's part of self-care. But if you have more time in the morning or you have more time at night, you're going to sit down and think about these things and say, where does this come from? Without judgment. Just let the body and the mind answer the question. Where does this come from? And why did I respond that way? There is another question I really like that I didn't write down because I don't want a lot of complexity. I want these things to be as simple for you as possible to follow. But I really like this next question. When was the first time I felt this? You don't have to have the answer. Many times we ask questions over and over again and an answer doesn't come up, and that's okay. But again, practice, right? The more we practice the self-reflection, okay, I had this tightening in my body. I had this tightening in my chest. I felt like crying. I felt suddenly overwhelmed. I got really rigid. I raised my voice. When was the first time I felt this way? A lot of times, that's where the answer lives. It lives in the body memory, in the memory which is in the body, not in the mind, not recorded like a movie is in the mind. That's a different type of memory. That's in the prefrontal cortex. I'm talking about the memory in your body. You ask your body, when did I first feel this way? And eventually you'll get an answer. Eventually you will get an answer to your question. So that can be really helpful to answering, why do I feel this way? Or why did I respond this way? Or why do I feel this way? Where does this come from? You can also answer that question by, when was the first time I felt this way? So it may seem a little like, why are these questions important? They help us self-reflect. Where are these responses that are automatically coming up during our parent-child interaction? This is going to help soothe the parent-child dynamic, because the better you understand yourself, the more room, this is actually coming up, I'm talking ahead, but the better we understand ourselves, the more room we have to hold space for our children, the more space we have to make good decisions, the more calm our bodies stay. The better we understand why we do the things we do, the more calm we can stay in our body, because it's really the not knowing. It's the automaticity. It's an old memory most of the time. I didn't write this in my notes, but I'm going to mention it briefly. Dan Siegel, great guy, psychiatrist, actually, child psycho, just a psychiatrist, amazing human being. He's written parenting books. A lot of the stuff I do is based on his parenting books. Great guy, Dan Siegel. Writes a lot with a woman named Tina Payne Bryson, also an amazing. Me okay? My microphone went out and came back in. Good. Okay. Anyway, his first parenting book, very old book, called Parenting from the Inside Out, he talks about, and I'm hoping I didn't lose my place, but he talks about this dynamic, the parent-child dynamic, right? And he says that when we're in our relationship with our parents, us, the adults who now have children, it's like two hands together in a prayer. And so they fit a certain way together, right? And then we move away from our parent and our hand turns and we have children. And then we use that same hand that we were holding in a prayer mudra, basically, and we hold it against our child's hand. And so realizing, reflecting, connecting with where our responses, our automatic responses are coming from, inform our new parent-child dynamic with our child. Now, maybe we had awesome parents. Maybe we had terrific parents, but the most wonderful, awesome parents are still not perfect. So we often carry over, not often, we do, this is how our neural networks are built. We carry over what we learned here over to the next relationship. So it's automatic. A lot of the things that we're doing are automatic. So being able to self-reflect where those things come from informs you. And then the parent dynamic with your child changes and you're more aware. And so therefore you're more calm in your body. You're more settled. And a more settled, calm parent, a more informed parent, a more aware parent, all of those words can be put together into the word aware. That's the parent that shows up and holds more space for their child. Does that make sense? If you can hold space for yourself, be forgiving and compassionate towards yourself, practice non-judgment towards yourself, drop the judgment, it's gonna turbo boost your parenting. And you'll see it. It just makes so much space for that relationship with your child. All right, let me get back to my notes because I want to stick to the time. Keeping a journal. So you don't have to suddenly become a writer. You don't have to write pages and pages in your journal, but I have found that journaling is incredibly helpful to us, helpful to the self-reflection process, helpful to stuff coming up. So, at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, you're reflecting on an interaction that you had with your child that day, on a physical response that you had in your body. And you're asking yourself, where does this come from? Why do I feel this way? When did I first feel this? A lot of times we can sit quietly in meditation or in a quiet space and listen to our bodies and receive the answers. That's wonderful. But journaling can really, really solidify that process. It's almost a conversation with ourselves where we can go back and read and discover. It can be very, very helpful. So keeping a journal, I wrote this, can be tedious, but incredibly helpful. There are two ways that I recommend journaling, and you want to choose the version that works best for you. You can write down all your responses, your feelings, your emotions, and the answers to the questions that I've given you. You just write the questions, answer, write down a little narrative, how you felt about it, and then you can reread it, or you can do what I've learned to do. And I really like this type of journaling. It was incredibly uncomfortable to learn it for me, who I actually have a degree in writing. My degree is in creative writing. So I have years of knowledge and wisdom that I've collected from writing. But this way has been the most effective for me. And what I do is I give myself 5 minutes a day to just dump on the page, stream of consciousness style. The reason this works so well is because I'm not going back to correct my grammar. I'm not going back to make sure that my sentences make sense. I'm not going back to make sure that there's a subject and a predicate. I'm not going back to make sure that I have the right adjectives. I'm just dumping. For 5 minutes, I'm just writing on the page, whatever comes up about the experience I had that day. Let me look at my notes because there's something I wanted to say about this. Natalie Goldberg, she's a writing teacher. She calls this style writing down the bones. And that's exactly what it is. You are writing down the bones. You are getting all the way down to the bones of the situation. And that's the foundation. And that's the core. And once you get comfortable with this just 5 minute data dump, and you can give yourself a prompt, you can give yourself one of these questions. Where did this come from? Why do I feel this way? When did I first feel this? And you can just answer that for 5 minutes. Once you get comfortable with that, the stuff that will come up, I've written stuff down and been like, oh my gosh, I did not know that about myself. I did not know that I felt that way. I did not know that that's where that was coming from. When I really let loose my desire to control language and I just dump it on the page, the real stuff comes up. The real self-reflection comes up. So little journal, 5 minutes. That's all you need. Just 5 minutes. Either that structured way that I described, where you write down your experience, your emotions, and then answer one of the questions that really resonates with you, or the 5 minute data dump. Both of them are going to be really helpful. Either way, you're going to get answers to your questions. And when we better understand ourselves, as I mentioned, and our own responses to our children, we have more space and clarity to understand and respond to them. So this is how we affect that child-parent dynamic. Now, there's one more piece I want to talk about, and I can see the time is 4:36. But I think I can do it because actually that was about 3 pages of notes, and this is only about a half a page because I really wanted to keep it simple. This is not a workshop on sensory integration or the neurology of a child ages 2 to 15. This is really basic. I want to talk about how the sensory system can affect behavior. That's easy. The sensory system is a part of the nervous system, and the nervous system controls everything. It controls sleep-wake cycles, appetite, attention, focus, flexibility, higher level thinking, imagination, social skills, motor skills. It controls everything. That's just the stuff I can remember. There's a whole lot more. It controls everything. The nervous system is connected to the CPU unit that runs your entire body, the brain. The brain is the primary part of the central nervous system, and the sensory system is a part of the nervous system. When a child's sensory system is not getting what it needs, in fact, let me just be even more general. When any of our sensory systems are not getting what they need, they don't work well. Like an engine that doesn't have enough oil or needs a tune-up, it sputters, it slows, and sometimes it just breaks down. Children need food and sleep and rest, but they also need movement. And they need a certain amount of movement. Not too much, not too little, just enough, just like Goldilocks. All the systems need just enough. Just like you observe yourself, observe your child. Just like I've asked you all this time to observe yourself, observe your child. When are they the most likely to melt down? What time of day? After what activities and events? After what food? After what meals or food items? start paying attention and observing. You can journal that too if you want. You can start writing things down that you notice. We're humans. We move in patterns. Everything we do is a pattern. The way we respond, the way we talk, the way we move our hands, the way we walk, the position we sleep in. We do everything in patterns. The way we socialize, we do everything in patterns. So observe your child's patterns. Pay attention to when it is that things can be challenging, and also pay attention to when they're at their best, when things are working. Like, oh, what happened today? Now, having said that, I just want to make a little post note underneath that and say that the really interesting thing about children is that they're still growing, both biologically in their bodies, neurologically in their minds, and as a result, developmentally, right? Development grows from what's happening in the body and the mind and what's happening through social interaction with the outside world. So when there are growth spurts, you'll see shifts in behavior. I just want to warn you now. When there are growth spurts in the brain that you can't see physically, there'll be shifts in behavior. These will spike and then level out. If you're looking at everything, if you're looking at what they're eating, how well they're sleeping, how much they're moving, they're getting what they need, there are no unusual stressors, like a pandemic. Everything's just about right. And you see a spike in behavior, most likely they're growing physically or they're growing in the brain, neurologically. There's actual growth spurts neurologically where neurological networks grow and become more complex. And there's also periods of pruning in the brain where stuff that they're not using is removed to make more room for complexity in the neural networks that they are using. You'll see meltdowns during those periods. You'll see shifts in sleep-wake cycles. You'll even see shifts in how much they're eating. So just a little side note to that. I wanted to mention something else. It's 4:41. I'm paying attention to the time. I talked about children needing food and sleep and rest, and also needing movement and certain types of sensory input. Every sensory system needs input, but every sensory system can be overwhelmed. So keeping in mind how much sound your child has been exposed to, because the world is a loud place. How much visually they've been exposed to, because there's a lot happening. You can't control the world, but you can observe it. You can pay attention, and then you can shift how you're responding to your child based on the experiences they've had that day. Does that make sense? So knowing how your child's sensory system is working, knowing if they've had too much or too little of something, being aware of those things. It's not another reason to criticize or judge yourself. It's not another detail to control. It's something to observe, so then you can shift how you're interacting with your children. Just the way that we shift our tone of voice if our children aren't feeling well or if they've just woken up. Just like we shift how quickly we move in our bodies if children are overwhelmed, whether emotionally or physically or neurologically overwhelmed by too much sensory experience. Just observing them and how they respond to the world and to us, and taking into consideration that the sensory system can either be under aroused, not get enough of something, or be over aroused and have gotten too much of something. It's just about being aware. Be aware, and then you can shift your dynamic. And once again, what helps you be able to shift the way that you respond to your child is firmly rooted in how well rested you are and whether or not your needs have been met. So I know it's not an ideal world. We just do our best in all situations. And that's what I started with. There's no magic key. I don't have a magic key for you, but I can tell you that you are an expert in your own child and you do know what's best. And these little tips that I've given you can support you. Hopefully, I've given you enough that it will support you to better get to know yourself and why you're responding certain ways to your children. And we all do it. I'm still doing it, but I'm really aware of that. And that changes a lot for us. and also becoming aware of them and where they are in space and time and their development and how their sensory system is taking in information, because it can get easily overwhelmed or it can be underwhelmed. All right, that's everything I've got for my notes, and I saw quite a few little pop-ups. So where are we at, Lisa?
I have to unmute myself. So there aren't any actual questions in the chat yet. There are questions about other things, but now they're going to come in. And you can
Cool.
either put your question in the chat. Well, before that, I would like to say, Carrie, you want to stop the recording? Yeah. And